Welcome to the Book Fair podcast. My name is Anthony, and this week we have an interview with Ryan LaSala, author of the new YA horror novel, The Dead of Summer. We're taking a look at some notable new releases for this week, and news stories include the interlibrary loan program ending for a library district after federal funding cuts, a California judge rules against book banning policies, and a nonprofit teams up with literary agents to drive literacy programs. First, let's start with an interview with Ryan La Sala, author of The Dead of Summer. Hello, Ryan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Can you start us off with just introducing yourself and the book that we'll be discussing today?
Absolutely, I'd love to. So, hi everyone. My name is Ryan La Sala. I am a horror novelist, and I've written a few books. This is my fifth book, The Dead of Summer, and it takes place on this island called Anchor's Mercy, which is not a real place, but is very much a real place for the characters that are on it. The main character, Ollie, is on his way back to this island that he was born and raised on, and he's determined to uncover what he feels like are these generation-old secrets about a chemical spill deep in the island's past and a current trend of sickness that's affecting basically only the townies, the locals, one of which is his mother. She's okay at the start of the book, but Ollie is really worried about her in general, and so he begins an effort to uncover sort of this decades-old mystery, and some answers find him sooner than he'd like when a storm hits the island and washes ashore some long sunken secrets that have been sort of lurking at the bottom of the ocean, kicking off this kind of catastrophe that defines Ollie's whole story. But at the same time, while you're reading his story, you also are reading along from the point of view of a scientist who has been assigned to piece Ollie's story back together weeks after the catastrophe, because something in his story might lead to saving the rest of the world from what's happening on this island.
And can you talk a little bit about Ollie's mother? Who is she, and what is their relationship like at the start?
Sure. So Ollie's mom, her name is Gracie, and she's like a live, laugh, love kind of mom. You know, like if you went into like a home decor store and found all those pillows with like fun kitschy sayings on them, like she's the embodiment of that kind of lady. She's so positive to the point that Ollie is like annoyed by her cliches and her positive outlook and her good vibes, because she's just survived, a life-threatening disease. So she feels like she's got this second lease on life, but Ollie feels terrified, now that he knows that his mom's mortal. And so they have a really interesting contrast at the start of the story and a lot of tension, because Ollie's trying to put on a good show of celebrating and coming home, but he's absolutely terrified about what he's going to find at home. And he doesn't really feel like he can even talk about it, because he's got to keep that smile up. He's got to be full brightness for the sake of his mom, because he's sort of been her caretaker for this time. And so shortly after the storm hits the island, they get separated, and the story ends up kind of becoming a reverse Finding Nemo situation, where Ollie's got to figure out what happened to Gracie, where she is she safe, and how can he get back to her.
Was there any personal story that kind of was the inspiration between Gracie and the relationship with Ollie?
Gracie's pretty different than my mom, but I will say that the story does have a lot of my own personal life in it, just by virtue of being about a town where there's a pretty vibrant queer culture. Because when I was younger, my mom was very, very good about understanding, like, hey, like, I think my child's a little different. I think that my kid might be gay. And even before I kind of knew that about myself, she started making decisions to make sure I had kind of the right resources and the right attitudes around me. And so she brought her family to for vacation one week every summer for a little while. She brought us to Provincetown, Massachusetts, which is this amazing enclave at the very tip of the Cape, full of theater and art and queer families and drag queens. And it was so that I could learn about people who were like me, so that when I started to figure out things about myself, I knew that the world would continue, that it wasn't all going to end if people sort of discovered this secret. And so she didn't indoctrinate me or brainwash me. She just sort of showed me that there was love left in the world for people like me. And it was going to Provincetown that inspired a lot of the makeup of the story that I'm now talking about, because it takes place in a really similar place.
And can you talk a little bit about Anchor's Mercy as a setting?
Sure. Anchor's Mercy, Maine, it's an island that has had a kind of interesting history. It wasn't populated for a long time because there's a lot of sort of oceanic turmoil that protects it, tides and trade winds and stuff. But that kind of made it the very perfect location in the 60s for a nuclear power plant that was being built there. However, and this is sort of widely understood in the book, something went wrong with the construction of that place, and there was a chemical spill back in the 60s that the locals sort of know about but don't really talk about, because it all got cleaned up. And the result, though, is that now the island has sort of this vibrant community on it that has been there all along, and people love to visit and stay for a week and then go. But the locals, the townies that are there year round, they start getting sick. And in Ollie, the main character thinks that it has something to do with, the chemical spill. Maybe that's a great place for him to start. But unsurprisingly, the locals, they don't want to talk about it because it's not a great look for a place that's seasonal to have something dangerous sort of lurking in the water. And so you've got the tension of a place that has to kind of prioritize visitors over the people that live there. And that's a huge tension in the book. It sort of remasters a lot of the choices that Ollie and his friends get to make when it comes to their own self-preservation. And it's a real thing. That's a real tension that exists in many places that are considered paradise or considered tourist destinations. But ultimately, people do live there, and they do need to clean up the messes that are kind of brought to their islands.
I like that. I like that. Cleaning up the messes. I was actually going to ask something about what are the kind of character contrasts that we get, because we have Ollie, we have some of his friends. What are some of the characters that are like tourists in the area? What are some of the people that are coming in that are from out of town that are here for parties and such?
Sure. Yeah. So very early on, Ollie is on the ferry on his way back to Anchor's Mercy with Gracie, and we get to meet a group of bachelorettes that they're on the ferry. They're on their way to have like the best time ever. Meanwhile, there's literally a storm brewing on the horizon that everyone sort of knows to be careful about. But when the storm hits, a lot of people end up kind of having to imperil themselves, because the visitors, they need brunch, they need drag shows, they need to have sort of this beautiful, luxurious time on this island, or else they're not going to come back. And so instead of making decisions to benefit the safety of everybody, you end up getting the prioritization of a good time. And these bachelorettes are kind of the center of some bad decision making that ends up in catastrophe for the rest of the island when something begins to kind of spread amongst the community. And Ollie and his community, they do their best to contain it, to get people to stay home. And for the most part, people listen, but we've got some bachelorettes that just have to get out there and have their karaoke night, right? It's their last night being single. And so it's because of this decision and this selfishness and this entitlement, frankly, that the effort to kind of contain this catastrophe doesn't go well. And that's how you end up with a book full of shambling, undead corpses that are all wearing tiaras and sashes that say bride or die.
So you also mentioned, and I wrote this quote down because I loved it. You said that the bachelorettes needed their brunches, they needed their drag shows.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the queer culture on Anchor's Mercy and how there's like this commodity of it, how they're selling it to tourists and things like that, and like what does it mean to the residents for that to have that queer culture?
Right. I mean, you find this in a lot of places where something that is sort of a beautiful sanctuary, attracts people from all over the world who want to partake in that. But then in the commodification of it, it begins to take on a life of its own and to prioritize its ability to be consumed over its ability to kind of last or endure, which is how you get sort of the tensions that you find in a place like Anchor's Mercy. Early on, Ollie meets a character named Sam on the boat who is seasonal. He's a kid that comes from wealth and is on his way back to Anchor's Mercy and sort of feels just as entitled, right, to the island as Ollie does because he's got a house on there, but he's only in that house for like a few weeks every summer. And for him, the island is not really just a sanctuary. It's a kind of residential resort type of place that you can relax, but he's completely out of touch with the people that kind of allow it to exist and that are there when he eventually leaves. And, to his credit, to Sam's credit, he is able to kind of take Ollie's sarcasm on the chin, and they do end up befriending one another. And he does sort of get to experience a different version of it. But I really wanted to write this book from the point of view of three kids that have been born and raised on Anchor's Mercy and have pretty different experiences within their own group, but still, know when push comes to shove, when it's coming down to us versus them, like we have way more in common than these visitors that are coming in who don't necessarily know how to behave as a community. I don't want to spoil anything, but a lot of the antagonists in this book are people who have come from the outside and ultimately just want to make it out by themselves and don't understand that surviving something this catastrophic comes down to our ability to work together, to stick together, to just to prioritize that kind of community that they lack.
And you're talking about some of the outside forces, some of the different perspectives in the story, and that takes us very nicely from, we've talked a little bit about the island, the history, the queer culture. Let's get into the darker side of things about what happens on this island. And what I want to look at is, when I was reading through it, I kind of felt it was like a mixed media, like it was a found footage film that also used like notes from a website that you have to read to get the whole story. Can you talk a little bit about this different perspective and the use of the different medium when you're looking at the scientist's perspective?
Absolutely. So I've always been a real big fan of found footage horror films. And there are a lot of books that I feel like similarly take the perspective, this sort of dissociated perspective of someone piecing it together to try to form a story for themselves. And when it comes to disaster, there's no main character in a crisis. It's just the people that often have luck on their side. But Ollie is our main character in this, but that doesn't necessarily translate throughout history because now we've got a scientist 3 weeks after Ollie's point of view takes place, trying to piece it all together, and there's a lot missing. There's a lot that just doesn't get written down right in the middle of a crisis, and so I thought it'd be interesting to kind of play with that weird blind spot between the experience of something and the history of it that makes it down onto paper. And at the same time, Ollie is kind of encountering the same problem in his present POV because he's trying to piece together anything you can find about a crisis that took place 60 years prior during this like chemical spill. And so you've got sort of these cycles of generations trying to figure out and piece together the narratives of the people that came before them because all of them know that there is some sort of answer, some sort of key to how we can maybe break these cycles. And as an author, it was fun. It was useful to be able to take the book's camera and sort of expand it to have information that Ollie as a teenager would have no way of accessing in the middle of a crisis. But giving a scientist the ability to kind of peer in, suddenly you've got a lot more to work with. And it was, it was a lot of work to figure out how to write transcripts and interviews and scientific papers, but I hope that it gives the reader sort of the feeling of a scavenger hunt that they can get to complete themselves.
And speaking of writing transcripts and looking at it kind of like a horror movie, what sort of references, source material, what kind of inspired those moments in the writing process? Were there any movies, shows, books that you looked to as a way to help structure those moments?
Yeah, I honestly, this is gonna sound kind of grim, but there are so many real life ecological disasters and like government cover-ups and moments where our policies have kind of fallen short of protecting us that I didn't really have to look too far into fiction for inspiration. A big part of what inspired this book was the impotence that I feel or I felt during the COVID crisis during quarantine, sort of just sitting in my home and watching on a national stage, healthcare policy be excluded and shirked and ignored and the cover-ups and I felt like, oh, I kind of want, if I'm going to write a story that has to do with any sort of outbreak, I want to show that there's kind of a million little tiny indiscretions that end up adding up to a threat that affects an entire community because these things don't just happen. They often happen as a result of like negligence or disorder or selfishness. So that's actually kind of the inspiration behind why so much of the book is focusing on after the fact and piecing together Ollie's story during.
And that actually segues perfectly, because I was going to bring this up, is in the year that we're in now, it's really hard to bring up illness, quarantine, pandemic without addressing the elephant of the room, without addressing the elephant in the room of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what exactly was your perspective of, the COVID pandemic? How is that that's something that the entire world experienced, something that you were trying to put to words in this book?
You know, that's a huge question. And it's an ongoing question too, because we're not free of it yet. We're still dealing with a lot of the echoes of a trauma that the entire world had to go through and how it sort of created moments for other things, other types of bad behaviors or antisocial behaviors to kind of rear up and pronounce themselves. I think the thing that maybe stuck with me as I was sitting down to write this book is that so much of what they were advising during the pandemic were behaviors that they might not necessarily preserve your health, but they will help the people around you, right? Like masking, for instance, and how Americans just could not get their idea or they could not get their minds around the idea that wearing a mask helped everybody and that then helps you, that there's sort of this like cyclical echo that reverbs back to you in terms of altruism and for whatever reason people just couldn't figure that out and to this day still have trouble with this kind of equation that just doesn't immediately center their own ability to stay healthy and I wanted to write about that kind of that psychological gap because in my book there's some similarity to the fact that you kind of you have to make decisions for the group in order to be part of a group that gets to survive and some people they can do that and some people it's only about how they can help themselves and they end up being sort of the weak links that make it much more worse for everybody else.
Right, and it's all about how the advice was, you know, it's against self-preservation. You always, you put the mask on yourself before helping others, but the overall, the greater advice was, this is for the betterment of other people and other people's safety. And that takes me back perfectly to something that you said earlier that I wanted to circle back to. You said there are no main characters in a crisis. Can you talk a little bit about Ollie's response to what's happening in quarantine, who he's dealing with, and maybe, since there are no main characters in a crisis, as the author, as someone who had to pick a person for this story, why was
Hmm.
it Ollie?
That's a great question. So when I say there's no main characters in Crisis, it's because everybody is sort of the main character of their own crisis, right? Like when it comes down to narratives of survival, everybody is sort of dealing with themselves as the main character of their own effort to make it to the end. What gives Ollie the particular edge in the story is he's part of this community and he understands it. And so while everybody else is running for their lives, Ollie knows where to go so that he knows like the safe places to hide. He knows the community members. He knows who's trustworthy. And in this particular book, there's a huge theme of learning to listen, to sort of calm down and listen to the monsters in this case. And we haven't talked about it yet, but Ollie was born and raised in a bed and breakfast that's called Singing House in the book, and it's sort of known for having a sing along piano in the parlor. And Ollie is a bit of a prodigy. He's been playing piano for the guests of his mom's bed and breakfast all his life. So he really knows how to listen closely to the people that want to sing and to help them do so. Um, and it's Ollie who eventually figures out that the creatures that are overtaking the island, their screams, their cries, there's a musicality to it, and he starts to listen, and he starts to try to think of a way that he can sort of think of music as a language that may bridge these totally inhuman things that are taking over. And he's got to find a way to test that theory, and he sort of fumbles in his effort to figure it out. But ultimately, I want to write a story in which it doesn't just come down to the violence of overcoming monsters. It comes down to actually being able to kind of understand them and to humanize them and to find a way to potentially subdue them, because the solution can't always be I think we get a lot of young men when the solution being shoot as many things as you can, right? Violence. And I didn't want that to necessarily be the answer in this story.
It's interesting that you mentioned avoiding violence in the story, because and I wanted to avoid talking about it, and then I find us kind of around this subject anyway, where you said, so you've said that these are shambling monsters, these are creatures, they're inhuman, and you're
Mm-hmm.
avoiding violence in the story. This is kind of like there's a clear correlation between these characters and zombies, which is something that's very big and popular in mainstream media. Is there anything you can say to speak to like how you wanted to humanize the monsters and avoid those tropes?
Absolutely. I mean, a consistent rule of zombie fiction is once you're bitten, you're done, right? And you're inhuman. You cease to be anything human, anything that can be negotiated with, anything that can be communicated with. And I think that's sort of the big fear around like pandemics, right? It's this idea that the second someone's sick, they cease to be part of our community, and we have to exclude them. But what we've seen is that there's a lot to learn from people who are sick, right? People who are dealing with an illness, and it brings me back to like the AIDS epidemic. And I wanted to write a sickness into a book that at first sort of presents as scary enough that the characters think that there's no humanity left in those that are afflicted by it, and they do their best to kind of shut them out. But ultimately, what Ollie discovers is that there is humanity left in these creatures, and it's finding a way to access that humanity, through music, through whatever, that I think is kind of the key to Ollie's survival in the end. But mind you, this is two books. So we have the first one that's the Dead of Summer, but there's an entire sequel. So don't worry, there's plenty of horrors remaining. But in the first book, as the characters are kind of getting their head around this particular pathology, I wanted to delve into something a little bit more complicated than just your run of the mill zombification, shambling corpse trope.
When you're writing the story and a character like Ollie is 17, is that level of violence something that you're considering? Are you consciously writing for a younger audience? Are you toning things down? This is more a question about like the writing process and writing for young adult, and not so much what actually went into the story.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely think about my teen readers and their parents, right? When I'm sitting down to write, I wouldn't say that I ever pull back as a result of that, but I do want to make sure that there are on the page considerations, right? Like, what might it mean to engage in this violence? Like, am I capable of surviving something that might ask me to do something that is scary, is dangerous? And so it's more a pedagogic approach that I take when I sit down and think what's sort of the lesson here? How am I discussing it? How do these characters have a chance to kind of think through this? And also, am I showing a range of reactions to something like this? Ollie spends a lot of the book with two other friends. They're his childhood best friends, and they have really different reactions to how to go about handling the problems and what to do about the people that are hurting them. Some of their reactions are stronger than others, and some of it's just the pure shock of being asked to do this in the first place. And so, yeah, I don't necessarily think that I pull back, and I want to make sure people who are going into this are aware, right? It's a horror novel, and so the situations and the circumstances are scary and pretty intense. But I also wanted to make sure that, like I said before, I wanted to take an approach to horror that doesn't necessarily prioritize like bloodshed. I wanted there to be a solution uh, available to these kids that had much more to do with things that I think are relevant to teenagers, right? Like, I think the ability to listen to your friends, the ability to work together as a team, the ability to humanize people who are different than you, the ability to listen closely to your instincts. Like, these end up being the toolkit that Ollie gets to use, and the reason I think that he's so capable as a character.
This is the last question that I ask all authors. It's very open-ended. It's very introspective and philosophical. So feel free to use this as a moment to get to give your final thoughts. Ryan, how do you see yourself and the work that you do as a writer?
I see myself as someone who is trying to create a new mythology around queerness. I've been the benefactor of a lot of support from my community and from my family, and if I can just give back a little bit of that to teenagers, to people that maybe don't have anybody queer in their lives but are wanting to learn about our community, then I'll consider that. That's kind of the mission that I put upon myself. Well, I was going to say what I also will sometimes say is that I think we get a lot of great coming out stories and depictions of the difficulty that can sometimes pose, but I often set my stories after that point, so that the horrors that people are encountering are not a function of homophobia, but their success and their ability to triumph often is a function of their identity and their ability to kind of be their authentic selves. So that's how I see my work.
Thank you. That was an interview with Ryan La Sala. His newest book, The Dead of Summer, is out now. You can learn more about Ryan and his work at ryanlasala.com. Next, we'll be covering new releases. But first, if you appreciate the work being done on the Book Faire podcast, there are a number of ways you can show your support. First, you can like, comment, follow, or subscribe wherever you're currently listening. Second, you can go to patreon.com/thebookfair to find episodes posted early, as well as links to news sources used throughout the show. You can also follow on Blue Sky at BookFairPod. However, the best way to support the podcast is simply by sharing it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Now, on with the show. Let's look at some notable releases out this week, starting with The Experiment by Rebecca Stead. As part of a long-term exploration project, 11-year-old Nathan and his family, members of an alien species called Cast, are masquerading as humans in New York City. But when Nathan starts to unexpectedly grow a tail, and he and his family are summoned to their mothership, the Wagon, he fears he'll go missing, like several other Earthside Cast children who failed to maintain cover, including his long-distance crush, Izzy. Life on the Wagon is even worse than expected. Upon arrival, he discovers it to be a place of inequity and deprivation, where Izzy and other disappeared children are forced into menial labor, while Nathan and his new tale are inexplicably celebrated as a success story and sent back to Earth. Suspecting the Wagon's leadership of hiding a dark secret, Nathan enlists his human best friend Victor to uncover the truth behind his people and their lifelong mission. In this twisty, thoughtful tale, Author Stead touches on themes of estrangement, assimilation, exploration, and agency as Nathan's seeking independence for himself and his interstellar peers parallels contemporary challenges faced by immigrants in the US. The casts are described as having assumed all earthly skin tones, and this book is recommended for ages 8 to 12. Next is Firebird, The Warbird Cycle by Elizabeth Wein. Drawing from extensive research on the House of Romanov and Russian female pilots in World War II, per an author's note, Wein crafts a thrilling series opener whose swift pace rivals that of a fighter plane. Russian teen Nastya graduates high school just as World War II begins. Her mother was a spy and her father was part of the unit that killed Tsar Nicholas II, and their stories have long fascinated Nastya, who was raised to be a fierce Soviet patriot, eager to fight for her motherland. She joined after-school clubs to prepare for combat and trained as a pilot. At the war's onset, she's tasked with training male pilots. But after her hometown of Leningrad is taken hostage and her unit is forced to evacuate to Moscow, Nastya, along with her mysterious mentor and her father's former comrade, the Chief, is drafted into the first all-woman aviation unit, led by renowned female pilot Marina Roskova. Fascinating details of the war, such as the impact of extreme cold in the winter of 1942, are peppered throughout taut battle scenes. Nastya's bravery and commitment to her country is palpable across this dynamically told war tale that reimagines well-known history. This book is recommended for ages 13 and up. And lastly, Moonleapers by Margaret Peterson Haddix. White-cued middle schooler Maisie feels like she's the only one of her classmates who doesn't own a smartphone. Though Maisie is excited to unexpectedly receive a phone from her mother, the tween is puzzled by the gift's origins. The device once belonged to Maisie's ill great-aunt Hazel, who wanted Maisie to have it despite their not having seen each other in years. When the tween learns that her parents must care for Hazel during the summer, the family leaves Ohio for Hazel's Maryland gated community home, where Maisie babysits her rambunctious younger siblings while her parents are busy. Maisie's only forms of entertainment are Hazel's pets, Cat the Great and Little Dog, and the odd texts and nursery rhyme-themed riddles that Maisie receives from an anonymous sender. It soon becomes apparent that Hazel has passed along more than an old cell phone. She was a Moonleaper, a time-traveling spy, and Maisie must now take up the mantle and leap into Hazel's past to change her great-aunt's and the world's future. A slow-moving build-up gives way to ample tension and suspense as Maisie jumps through time. Author Haddix forefronts depictions of Hazel's childhood during the Great Depression and World War II in this potent series-opening adventure about one person's power to change the world. This book is recommended for ages 8 to 12. And now finishing the episode with some headlines, starting with some unfortunate news out of Florida, where a library system is pausing its interlibrary loan program due to federal budget cuts. The interlibrary loan process is a common practice where one library system can reach out to another to borrow books or media when they do not carry a particular title within a state. And now the practice is being stopped in Florida due to a loss of federal funds. The Northwest Regional Library System will no longer be able to lend out or borrow titles across Florida. Funds were appropriated by Congress in the state legislature. However, the disbursement of funds, which were to be handled by the IMLS, did not make it to the district in time, leading to the program being cut from the year's budget. This comes after an ongoing battle between the Trump administration and the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Another similar story comes from Jefferson County, confirming their own library system is also stopping the program. According to Bay County Public Library, only about 25 to 30 patrons request to use the interlibrary lending program a month. Despite the small size of the program, these cuts are affecting areas and patrons. It is a chilling reminder of the far-reaching fallout of budget cuts brought about by President Donald Trump's administration. Time will tell just how harshly these cuts will affect smaller libraries. Next, some good news. A judge rules that Huntington Beach Library cannot make certain materials inaccessible. Huntington Beach Library's policy of making some content inaccessible to underage patrons without parental consent has been ruled unlawful by an Orange County judge. An LGBTQ advocacy group called Alianza Trans Latinx teamed up with high school students and the American Civil Liberties Union Foundation of Southern California to originally sue the city in response to the policy. Orange County had penned a resolution that went against California's statewide laws around book bans, leading to the immediate legal challenge. Attorneys for the city protested the lawsuit, as the policy had not yet been implemented. Freedom to Read advocates worked swiftly and diligently, combating Huntington Beach Library's policies. Chloe Rios Wyatt, CEO of Alianza Trans Latinx, said, quote, "The court made it clear that Huntington Beach cannot censor books simply because of whose stories they tell. Representation saves lives, and access to knowledge is essential to dignity and equality for all." End quote. Coming next, Every Child a Reader partners with literary agents on literacy initiatives. Every Child a Reader is a nonprofit organization that organizes book donations as well as providing free educational materials for students for each grade level. Literary agents, who scout authors and represent writers and manuscripts in publication, are now taking a more proactive role in promoting children's literacy. Together with Every Child a Reader, they have created the Literary Agent Circle of Sponsors. 28 agencies have signed on so far, and their donations will help expand the reach of programs such as Children's Book Week, Get Caught Reading, and the National Ambassador for Young People's Literature program. The initial funding from the new partnership will be going toward delivering kits to schools for their event Keep Bans Off Our Books later this month, just in time for Banned Books Week, taking place in October. The program will be sending kits to 1,200 schools and libraries, and there are currently discussions to supply book donations to underfunded schools and libraries. And closing out this week, the Bandwagon is getting ready to give away banned books for free. Penguin Random House is bringing back the Bandwagon Tour, giving away banned books at libraries and independent bookshops in Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia. This brief tour kicks off during Banned Books Week on October 5th. The Bandwagon will be giving away 30 titles, all of which are currently banned or challenged in different schools or libraries across the United States. Anyone visiting the Bandwagon can receive a free book as well as scan a QR code. Every scan will donate a free book to a community in need via a partnership organization, First Book. The Bandwagon will be stopping at 4 locations from October 5th to October 11th. West End Neighborhood Library and Solid State Books in Washington, D.C., as well as Northeast Regional Library and Parkway Central Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. If you're near DC or Philadelphia, stop by the Bandwagon for Banned Books Week to help support a good cause and get a free banned book. This will conclude another episode of the Book Faire podcast. If you'd like to learn more about any of the stories covered today, check out patreon.com/thebookfair. There, you can find links to news stories as well as additional resources. You can also follow the page for free to get access to early episodes, and there are no posts hidden behind a paywall. You can also help the podcast by simply sharing it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Thank you very much for listening, and as always, I'll talk at you next time.